Today we're going to be talking about the parables of Jesus. The parables. Now, many of you know I'm not a fan of Jesus in any sense. I'm not one of those people who view Jesus as a virtuous, loving, kind leader. I see Jesus very much as a person who preyed on poor people, a person who reveled in the idea of entire cities being destroyed, a person who pushed people to do things that were not in their own best interest. When we view Jesus under the microscope, there are not many standards by which this person can be declared as good. And in many cases, it is often our own infatuations with what we think about what Scripture says. And in many cases, as you will find, because I think I've shared this with you all before, one of the main reasons that I deconverted, one of the main reasons is because I realized that Christianity is one of the most disingenuous faith systems on this planet. And what I mean when I say that, I mean 99.999% of Christian believers have never read their religious book in full. And so what most people are saying about the Bible is not exactly what the Bible says. It's what Big Mama said. It's what their pastor said. It's what their favorite deacon said, but these motherfuckers have actually not read the book. And that's the only way you can come away looking at Jesus as a good character, is if you have never read all four of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And even saying all four is a misnomer because it's all four in the Western version of the Bible, however you want to say that. But the point is, you ain't read the story if you think this guy is good. But that's what you realize about Christians. It doesn't take very long in dealing with Christians to realize that they have never read the whole Bible. As a matter of fact, most of them, even when they take their reading through the Bible in a year challenge, most of them are still not reading through the Bible, even when they're following the challenge, because the challenges typically have the Bible chopped up outside of its context. So you're just reading Psalms 34, 1 through 5 today, and then tomorrow you're going to read 1 Samuel 13 through 16. That's how that shit goes. But this is how the idea of Jesus being any form of goodness or any form of righteousness is allowed to persist, because nobody's actually reading the stories to critique them. And in many cases, people lean into the parables that Jesus shared. And they say that these parables were so beautiful. I think one time I walked through the Beatitudes and showed how even though secular people have said, yes, the Beatitudes are beautiful and they're things we should all strive for, I showed y'all that means they didn't read that shit, because it's not beautiful. No, the meek shall inherit the earth. That's not actually beautiful. That's the ancient way of saying, wait your turn. Your day coming soon. Like, this is bullshit that people think that shit is good. Like, oh my God, y'all are horrible. But no, so the big point is, people lean into the parables of Jesus and almost like this semi-ritualistic way, just like invoking the parables, says, yes, these were the good things. Jesus' parables were beloved. The parables of Jesus, for those of you who don't know, are short, often metaphorical stories found in the Gospels, intended to convey moral, spiritual, or theological lessons. These stories often draw on everyday experiences of societal norms of first century Judea and Galilee, such as farming, family dynamics, and labor. Examples include the parable of the Good Samaritan, the prodigal son, and the sower. I'm not going to mention the parable of the Good Samaritan in this one, I don't think. But while we're there, the fact that there is a parable of a Good Samaritan is not a compliment. This is not a loving story. Now, to be clear, the point of the story of the Good Samaritan, or the parable of the Good Samaritan, is that even Samaritans can be better than you. That's the point of the story. But to have that story that way is automatically inferring and implying that Samaritans are bad people. This just so happened to be a good one, and I'm going to use this good one to show you how bad you are. So let's jump into a few of these parables and see if we can pull something from the text. So the first one I want to talk about is the parable of the 10 virgins, which actually, even as a pastor, I was always uncomfortable with this one. And so I definitely didn't preach this one a lot. But in this parable, which is found in one of the places found, Matthew chapter 25, verses 1 through 13, it encourages readiness for an unspecified time of judgment. And it typically, I critique this one for promoting fear and exclusion rather than compassion or inclusivity. The idea is that there are 5 wise virgins, and then there are 5 foolish virgins. But the foolish virgins are shut out because they had to run back and get oil. So because they did not have enough oil to see, and they had to go back and get oil, this is what made them foolish. What made them foolish was not having enough oil. And so they left to go get some more oil, and the bridegroom came and took the 5 wise virgins. Are we not going to recognize that this story is about human trafficking? Or do we not realize that the parable that Jesus is saying is basically, there was once a pimp who had 5 wise hoes and 5 foolish hoes. The 5 wise hoes had enough money for the pimp to be satisfied. The 5 foolish hoes, they didn't have their money right. So the pimp left them in the cold. This is this beautiful story. Are we overlooking that this story is ultimately a forced wedding? That this story is ultimately a harem of women being sold to the priest or the king or the, whatever the fuck he is, the bridegroom. Because and mind you, this is a New Testament parable being told by Jesus. And in Jesus's parable, he decides to use rampant polygamy to describe the kingdom. He says, the kingdom is like this. The kingdom is like pimps and hoes. That's what this parable is. Bitch better have my money. That's what this parable is. This parable is the subjugation of women. It is the degradation of women. It is making them property. Their value in the parable is their virginity and their ability to keep the light on. If that don't sound like prostitution, you got new, fresh meat out here. How do we convince ourselves that this is beautiful? Who convinced you to hate yourself? Sorry, I couldn't help it. You've been hoodwinked, bamboozled, ran amok. Couldn't help it. But it's real. Who convinced us that this shit is beautiful? This isn't beautiful. This is pimp. It's pimping. And apparently pimping ain't easy. Well, maybe it is, hey. But this emphasizes obedience and submission to divine authority over moral growth or interpersonal kindness. This doesn't even, and it's funny because one thing that the Christian Bible doesn't really do is encourage people to help each other. You're not getting that from this parable. You don't get from this parable that the 5 wise virgins shared some of their oil with the foolish virgins. That's not the story you get. Because in the New Testament, wisdom is associated with shrewdness. It is. Wisdom is associated with shrewdness. We're going to talk about it. Let's go ahead and talk about it. The parable of the talents. Matthew chapter 25, verses 14 through 30. I used to preach the parable of the talents up and Damn. It was one of my favorites until I got my my degree in social science with a concentration in leadership and business administration minor. It's my first degree. When I got that, I had to wrestle with some of the undertones of the parable of the talents. This parable rewards those who invest and grow their talents, but harshly punishes the servant who is cautious and returns only what was given. It seems to valorize capitalism, risk-taking, and servitude rather than fairness or equity. It's parable of the talents. And this one gets told a few different ways. But ultimately, somebody, the landowner, and notice how many of Jesus's parables are about a landowner, but this landowner comes out and gives some people some stuff. Somebody gets 1, somebody gets 5, another gets 10. And then the guy comes back later to check and see what did they do with his money. Bitch, better have my money. This is the whole Bible. It's the whole Bible. Please don't forget, in the book of Acts, God, according to the writer of the book of Acts, struck down Ananias and Sapphira for changing their mind about how much money they wanted to give. Struck them down. Dead. Bitch, better have my money. That might need to be the name of this episode. I don't know. That might get me demonetized. But anyway, this parable is definitely, the guy comes back and says, well, let me see what you got. The one I gave 10, what did you do? He said, sir, I went out, I took this 10 and I got some, and I made more with it. And he says, all right, good. Yeah. All right, what about the one I gave 5? Well, I took this 5 and I got some more with it. All right, good. Yeah. All right, what about the one that I gave the 1 to? Well, you gave me this one and I knew that you are a harsh businessman. And so I didn't want to mess this shit up. So I just kind of put it in the bank and just let it sit there. It didn't accrue any interest or anything, and just kind of let it sit there for a minute. So I still have the one you gave me, and I'm going to give that back to you. And that guy gets punished. He gets punished for not making a profit. That's the parable of the talents. The parable of the talents is that the people who don't make profits get punished. But I do want to share some nuance in that. All right? There is another way to interpret the parable of talents. But as with all things in the Bible, none of this shit is univocal. There's plenty of ways to interpret it. But there is another way to interpret it. And this may challenge how you view any of the other parables. It may challenge how you view Jesus himself. It may challenge how you view the earlier writers of the gospel. Now, I'm not saying this is sound, found, or any of that. Just saying, just something to consider. That maybe what Jesus was presenting in this parable is not about some distant kingdom of heaven, but is more so about the indifference of life. That's a way that it could be interpreted. That this the idea that life rewards those who do more with what they have and is indifferent to the reasons why we choose not to, even when they're good reasons. But that's an entirely different type of thought conversation. That's an entirely different type of thought experiment. That's definitely more so on the philosophical lines, which I enjoy. I tend to enjoy only when they have some type of utility. But this parable is undeniably a promotion of unequal relationships. It's very interesting. It reinforces hierarchical structures and economic inequality, prioritizing servility and profit over human dignity. Which again, when people claim that they don't know where the prosperity preachers are getting their messages from, I'm immediately reminded that this must be another motherfucker that's never read the fucking Bible. This shit is as clear as it can get, man. It's as clear as it can get. And this parable gets told, again, several different times in several different ways. But let's continue. There's also Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 through 46. This one was not one of my favorites, but it's the parable of the sheep and the goats. This parable divides humanity into those who are saved and those who are damned, which I always like to remind believers that you cannot have an all powerful God who's not capable of saving everybody. That's not all powerful. If you're not capable of saving everybody, you're not all powerful. You missed some. You dropped a few. Mary Jane's neck broke. Okay, I don't actually, was that Mary Jane in that one? It might have been a different one. Either way, doesn't work. Doesn't work. You have to be able to save everybody. If you all powerful. Otherwise, you're just some powerful. If only some people are saved, then God is only some powerful. Point blank, period. That's how words work, you know? All is all, you know? But while it promotes the idea of helping others, the eternal punishment for failing to meet the standard is harsh and unmerciful. And that is the thought experiment that we think about many times. We ask ourselves, how long is an eternity? How long is infinity, is an infinite time? How long is everlasting? And then you ask yourself, what crime is worth everlasting punishment? You know? But, and it's even when you do the thought experiments, when you do those type of thought experiments, you can immediately kind of realize that, oh no, there's no justice in this. This isn't about justice. This isn't about righteousness. This isn't about rightness. This is about primitive punishment, you know? So, no, we can move on from that. But the whole idea is that, and this is the thing, I often remind people, like, God is discriminative. This is the whole fucking idea. But the reason why people don't realize that is because they still have these very superstitious relationships with the idea of God as opposed to sociological concepts of God. And when you actually do have an understanding of the sociological concepts of the emergence of the idea of God, then you do not have a God that is not in favor of its people. You know what I'm saying? Which is ultimately, very much so, it is that our relationship with these gods that have further steeped us into discriminatory practices, because the evolution of God in nations is damn near simultaneous. Because gods exist for nations. Gods do not exist for individuals. They exist for groups in the same way that logos do, you know. But yeah, so this is why Jesus is constantly giving scriptures or giving these warnings that he did not come to bring peace, but a sword of division, to turn people against other people, to separate the chaff from the wheat, to separate the sheep from the goats. This is the whole purpose of this brand of religion from our earliest influences with religion, which again come from that tribalistic, nationalistic way of defining who we are in the world and having a mascot on our side. Now, the problem is we have not evolved enough sociologically, intellectually, to understand that that's the process that we've kind of gone through here. You know, I didn't mean to go down that rabbit trail, but the whole point is that God as is will always be a divisive denominator, because that's how the whole idea of God from a sociological standpoint is to set us apart. That's the idea of sanctification, sanctimonious, you know. That's the idea of holiness, you know, that you've been set apart by this special God, you know, and this makes you special as opposed to everyone else, which is why it's really hard to have religious ideals without having supremacist ideals, because that's what many, especially these Western religions, are catering to. It's catering to this ego that you are more special than everybody else. And so everybody else should bow down to you. You will find the word bow in the Bible more than you will find the word love. Okay. But let's go. Ooh, this one was one of my favorites. Prodigal Son. Everybody knows Prodigal Son, right? Well, not everybody, but you get what I'm saying. Luke chapter 15, verse 11 through 32. The story celebrates the return of a wayward son. You know, how many of y'all know this story? I've preached this one so many damn times, and I've preached it so many damn ways. And I can't lie. Now, I enjoyed urban preaching because we got to do whatever the fuck we wanted to do with how we preach stuff. So a lot of our stuff ended up being more self-help than anything else, which is why I'm so good at this type of stuff. But this story was interesting, right? Because you have this one son who basically goes to his father and said, I want my inheritance. And from a cultural context, what he is saying is, you're better off, you're worth more to me dead than alive, which is true from an inheritance standpoint. But so he asked for his inheritance. And the Bible's, and his older brother is like, oh man, why are you doing that? But his older brother stays and works. Maybe he's older, I think it is. Yeah, it's his older brother, and his brother works. So the younger brother, he gets his inheritance and he leaves his father's house and he goes out there and just lives. The Bible says he spends all of his inheritance on riotous living. You know, I was like, ooh, riotous living. I want to know what type of heathenish shit that is and how can I get in on it, you know? But no, he goes out and he spends all of his money, spends his entire inheritance on riotous living. Allegedly, there might have been some prostitutes involved with this riotous living, you know? So I've heard, but he ends up being so poor, and he can't find anything to eat that he's willing to eat from the pig slop, willing to eat what the pigs are eating. And then he remembers, I have a father. That's supposed to be the gospel right there. I have a father who loves me. And even though I left his loving arms, if I just go back to the father's house, if I just get back in the Father's good grace, I know he'll welcome me. And that's so pathetic. Like, yikes, that's not how we should be approaching people we love. You know? But that's what we do, and we make it, we often preach it in a way that no matter what you've done, God is waiting there, waiting to love you. You know what I'm saying? Which is, you know, it's beautiful. Shoot. I mean, and there are some things in that, right? There's this idea that if you really love somebody, right, and that person, for whatever reason, decide they don't want to be with you, you know, and they leave. Forrest Gump type of shit. You know what I'm saying? And later Jenny comes back. That's beautiful. I felt bad for Forrest, you know, but it's still beautiful. You know, they came back. I get that. I do have a lot of issues with that part, but that's not the part that I'm going to focus on. I'm going to focus on the most obvious aspect in this story that shows that equity, equality, fairness, justice, and righteousness are not concerns of the writers of these stories. Because the other character is the older brother who gets made to be the villain of the story because he didn't leave. He stayed, he worked hard, he loved his dad. When the prodigal son came home, things that belonged to him, his dad gave to the prodigal. You know, this story can be interpreted as dismissing the value of personal accountability. The hardworking elder son is overlooked, sending a mixed message about justice and fairness. Now, what I really need you to understand is there are countless thousands of people in churches all over the United States who feel like that older brother, who feel like their work and their commitment is undermined because they didn't go out and get a testimony. It's a real issue. And it causes a lot of psychological trauma for people because sometimes they feel like in order to be accepted or embraced in church, they have to go out and make a lot of bad mistakes so they can talk about how bad they were and how good God has been. And much of that comes from this parable. You know, who knew we'd be able to get so much from this? Let's talk about the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. You know, and this is told in Luke chapter 16, verses 19 through 31. And this parable contrasts the suffering of a poor man who is later rewarded in the afterlife with the torment of a rich man who ignored his plight. It promotes a view of cosmic justice that relies on suffering in this life to earn rewards in the next, rather than encouraging systemic change or immediate relief of suffering. And I think those are things that people don't think about when they're going through these parables. This version of the parable, God rewards the poor man for his suffering. God rewards, you get heaven because you suffered the most. Oh man, y'all, that's not a healthy thing to say, especially if you own the whole system. You own the hill, you own the cattle on 1,000 hills, but your children, you're going to reward them for suffering without the things that you own and could easily demonstrate and delegate and distribute. You say, no, I'm going to let my children be born in a world where I could give them everything they need, but I want to see if they'll still love me without it. Doesn't that sound familiar? Isn't that like Job? I want to see if Job will still bless me if I let you kill his kids. All right. That's God rewards people for suffering. How you see this as a good character, I don't know. But yeah. And again, there's no, for this God to be omniscient, there's no foresight of systemic change. There's no foresight of creating better systemic infrastructure. There's no foresight of creating institutional transformation. As a matter of fact, Jesus believes that there will always be poor people. That's his belief. That's what Jesus said. He says, the poor you will always have with you, because that's who he needs to inherit the earth right before he destroys it. I'm just saying. And so this perpetuates the idea that enduring suffering is virtuous while undermining efforts to address inequality and injustice in the present. And that's exactly a lot of the baggage that we see come from this type of parable. There are many minority and marginalized communities where there is that undercurrent of, we just got to suffer through it and God will meet us on the other side. That somehow suffering is the thing that is virtuous. Fuck that shit. Listen to me. Strategy is better than sacrifice. I'm going to say that shit again, just in case you didn't hear it in the back. Strategy is better than sacrifice. All right. So just to kind of provide a humanist critique of some of these underlying themes, there's a focus on supernaturalism over practical ethics, right? So many of the parables assume divine authority and judgment as the basis for morality rather than focusing on practical or secular ethical reasoning. As a matter of fact, ethics are not considered at all. Morality grounded in human well-being and rationality is more meaningful and effective than adherence to divine commands, which is another reason why I'm super big on building community beyond superstition. And that's a reason why we're coming to Raleigh in April. All right, we're coming to North Carolina, baby. All right, so there's also fear-based motivation, which you see in a lot of these parables. And anything that is based in fear is likely not going to be that healthy outside of scenarios. But the majority of the parables are fear-based motivation. It's FOMO. Like heaven is literally FOMO. This shit is FOMO. You're missing out on some shit that don't exist. I will pass. FOMO my ass. Shit. All right. Many parables emphasize fear of divine punishment or eternal damnation as a motivator for behavior. So don't do this because this is good. Don't do this because this is right. Don't do this because this is fair. Don't do this because this is moral. Do this because you get cookies in the sky. Nope. Barney was better than this shit. There's also a high level of exclusivity and tribalism. Many parables, like the wedding banquet, Matthew 22, 1 through 4, depict exclusion of those who do not comply with divine expectations. True virtue, from a humanist perspective, lies in inclusivity and acceptance, not reinforcing in group out group dynamics, which much of the New Testament continues to reinforce. Much of it being tied to Jesus's words. When you're looking for this unified Christianity that sees everybody as unified or sees everybody as equal, you have to appeal many times to Paul's words. But then even Paul's words are ironically contradictory, because he does say stuff like there is no Jew nor Greek. He says that. He says there's no Roman, no Jew, no Greek. Doesn't mention anybody else, though. Yes, he says things like we're all equal. He says there's no female, no male. But he also says women I do not permit to speak in the church. He also says women are the weaker vessel. So their ideas of equality don't seem to be very reconcilable. And this is the gospel, the ministry that we have, the gospel of reconciliation, the ministry of reconciliation. See, that's what I've been doing the past few years. I've been reconciling what this shit actually means. Jokes. All right. There's the neglect of structural solutions, which is a major issue. The parables often focus on individual moral failings or virtues, ignoring systemic issues like poverty, oppression, or inequality. Structural problems require collective action and systemic solutions, not just individual moral reform. Unfortunately, we're fighting that battle again with the new moral majority. But we've been down this road before, and if we don't lay down and let them run all over us, they won't be able to run all over us. All right. But from this perspective, the parables of Jesus often reflect the values and limitations of the time in which they were told. While some stories do contain elements that may resonate with humanistic values, such as compassion and justice, they are overshadowed by a framework that prioritizes submission, fear, supernatural reward, and subjugation over autonomy, reason, and collective well-being. A humanist critique encourages re-examining these stories not as timeless moral guides, but as historical artifacts to be analyzed and, where necessary, rejected in favor of a more inclusive and rational ethical framework. So, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation today. I definitely enjoyed having it. It was a kind of like going back down memory lane, walking through some of these parables and highlighting in many of the insidious ways that these things impact our way of being, our way of living, our way of breathing. And you can kind of see why so many believers are struggling with many things in their lives. But as we're empowering ourselves with information and empathy, we are equipping ourselves to make a difference. Thank you for watching today's video. I'm so glad that you made it all the way to the end. I'm healing up nicely, and I'm actually recovering from a little bit of a cold right now as well, but I had to make sure that we got some content in front of you. The video you watched today is actually from a conversation I had about 10 months ago. Can you believe that it's been less than 2 years since we started sharing content on this profile? It's absolutely amazing, the growth journey we've had from 52 subscribers to nearly, I think it's 63,000 now. And now we're just building this amazing community that's lifted off in Southern California that we're calling Bridge City. And we're watching this thing literally spread across the globe. Right now, we're gathering all of our members into one place, bridgecity.app, where we're allowing them to have monthly activities, events, while we also work to build this mission and vision out. And of course, our mission and vision is to connect better, to build better, and to live better. And right now, we're actually seeing that thing happen right before our eyes. So I'm super excited about that. I'll be back to my regular production schedule as soon as possible. My healing journey is coming along better than expected. I'm just now fighting through this little flu thing. But I am super excited to get back with you all because I have this other video, part 2 of why the Bible is fan fiction. But I don't want to take too much of your time today. Please let me know your thoughts about today's video. I know you got to have some thoughts about it. And of course, don't forget to like, share, or subscribe. And until next time, keep rising.